Let's examine how we can fix bad user interface and turn it into something not only accessible and usable, but also delightful. We'll take this ugly calendar UI, apply some UI design fundamentals, and step by step, we will turn it into something that looks like this. There's plenty to cover here, so let's dig in. In this video, I will actually participate in JavaScriptmas 2024, which is a coding challenge, a daily coding challenge created by Scrimba and MDN. The way this works is every single day of December up until Christmas, you get a new fun coding challenge. And if you solve the challenge and submit it, you have a chance to win their grand prize. And their grand prize is MacBook Air M3 merged from Scrimba and MDN and a lifetime Scrimba Pro membership. And out of those prizes, I think that Scrimba Pro membership is the most valuable one. If you're not familiar with Scrimba, they offer a ton of courses from CSS to JavaScript, TypeScript, React, and so on. In any case, this is one of the prizes, and to make it perfectly clear, this video is sponsored by Scrimba. Thanks so much to Scrimba for sponsoring this. Today, I will solve the second challenge, the challenge for December 2nd, and this is going to be fixing bad calendar UI. If you want to participate as well, hit the link in the description, and not only will you have a chance to win fantastic prizes, but you will actually have a ton of fun while doing so. Let's open the second challenge here. In this challenge, you will get an ugly calendar UI, and your job is to fix it. This is how the calendar UI looks. It's pretty clear that this UI needs fixing, and this is exactly what we will do in this video. We will fix this bad UI by applying fundamental UI design practices. If you're not comfortable with best UI practices, then this is the video for you. And additionally, Scrimba has a fantastic course. It's also going to be linked down below. So check it out if you want to brush up on your UI development skills. All right, let's jump into the code. So we are in Scrimba editor here. And as you see here, we have a couple of files here, index.html, index.js, and index.css. This is where we'll spend most of our time. The HTML is straightforward. We have a couple of elements here, and this calendar UI is actually populated by JavaScript. This is the code responsible for this, and here is our preview. I'll open it, and I'll actually pin it because I want to have it visible at all times as we're fixing this. Let's expand it a little bit. I'll jump into my CSS. If you look at the code, it's pretty obvious that there are some really bad design choices made here. Font family is set to Times New Roman and Comic Sans MS, so this is what we will need to fix. But the first thing that I want to do is fix the colors here, because this is difficult to look at. And this is not only ugly, this is inaccessible. If you examine the contrast between those colors, this white and red, this is clearly insufficient, and this is clearly a major accessibility problem. Instead of manually picking the colors and creating your own color palette, I suggest you use one of the tools available online that will give you an existing color palette that already works well. There are a number of color palette tools online, and two of the tools that I like are color.adobe.com and colors.co. I will actually use colors.co in this example. I'll open it, and right now, as we're working with the Christmas calendar, I will actually search here for Christmas, and this will give me a number of predefined palettes, and I can just pick one that I like. My idea for this UI is not to have a typical calendar, but something a little bit more interesting. We're going to have every day as a separate box. So I want to have a dark background and light boxes for each day. And I will choose the color palette based on this. So if you're working on your own design and you have a rough idea about what you want it to look like, then you can search for the color palette that will match your idea. So this is why I'm searching for Christmas here. I want Christmassy colors, which are first and foremost going to be reds and greens. And the second thing that I want to look at are colors that have sufficient contrast. A lot of those existing color palettes that you see here look great, but they might be difficult to work with because the contrast ratio between the colors available is not sufficient. For example, in this palette, none of those greens will work together well because clearly this is not enough contrast ratio for this to be readable. Even the contrast between this dark red and light red is probably too small to work well. So in this case, if you pick this color palette, you're going to have to tweak those colors and make sure that they are accessible. I'll show you how to do that in a bit. Let's just first pick the color palette that we will use here. And I like this one, not because it offers many colors, but rather because it offers colors with sufficient contrast. So this white is going to work well with this green and even with this dark red. And again, if I want to use dark red and light red in combination, those two are probably going to be good enough. Just as well, the contrast between those two greens should be sufficient, and this should be accessible. So I'll pick this color palette and I will choose expert palette option. As I'm working with CSS, I'm going to pick CSS option here and I'm going to copy HSL variant. I love working with HSL color format because it's really easy to tweak the colors if necessary without actually breaking the color palette. Components of HSL are hue, saturation, and lightness. So if a certain color does not have enough contrast, I can easily tweak the lightness by making the color either darker or lighter, and this is not going to affect my color palette because the color itself will remain the same. It'll just be a little bit darker or lighter. If you want to learn more about that, check my guide on using HSL colors. I will copy this and jump back to Scrimba, and here I'm gonna set this up on root element. I'll just paste this in and I will use those colors in my UI. The best practice is to set up your CSS custom properties or variables on the root element if you want to make them available globally. I will replace this background color red on my body element with Brunswick green. This is going to be dark green. There we go. I will set my text color to anti-flash white here, and I will remove colors from headlines. Whenever you're working with colors, your best bet is to have a couple of colors and stick to those. So this is exactly what I will do here. I will remove the background color from my calendar container because essentially, as I mentioned, I want to have every calendar day as a separate entity on the screen. The calendar box selector targets every item here. I want those boxes to be white, so I will use the color platinum. And Scrimba has a really nice autocomplete in your code here, so you're gonna see immediately which colors are available. And what I want here is platinum, right? And the color, obviously this isn't going to work, so we're going to switch it up and we're going to change it to Brunswick green just to have a nice contrast here. And even if you look at the changes we've made now, it's pretty obvious that we've improved this design quite a lot. By getting rid of the bright red color, we made this much easier on the eyes, and we've also fixed accessibility problems because the white text on that particular red was completely unreadable. Well, we have nice contrast here, so this is going to work fine. If that's the only thing that you do with your UI, tweak the colors to make them accessible, you've done a great job. Sometimes it is difficult to know exactly if the colors have sufficient contrast, but that's where you can use developer tools. I will open them. I will select my headline here. I will click on this color, and right here I see the contrast ratio. If I expand this, I'll see mark if this is sufficient or not. So DevTools are telling me that there is enough contrast between this white and the background, which is green in my example. And if for some reason you want to tweak the color or change it, then you can use the color picker tool from here and select another color, and developer tools will tell you if the contrast is good enough. And apparently contrast between the red we had earlier and white is good enough. In any case, this is how you can easily test your colors to make sure that they are accessible. I will close my developer tools, and the next thing that I want to do is I want to fix the fonts on this page. We have Times New Roman and Comic Sans. And again, with fonts as with colors, the simpler is usually better. So you want to use 1 or 2 fonts at the most. We're talking about Christmas and we're talking about Christmas decorations, so we want to have a little bit more decorative font. In this case, something like cursive would probably work well. I'm going to remove font family from my H2 element and from my H4 element. And now we have a single font on our page, which is going to be Times New Roman. This is not what I want. Even if I just remove this part of the code here and just use the default serif font, even this is a major improvement from the initial version, which was using Comic Sans. This is much more appropriate and it works a lot better. But if you want to take this a step further, you can use something like Google Fonts. They have a ton of amazing free fonts that you can use in your UI. So let's open Google Fonts and see if we can find a good Christmas font. Fonts.google.com. And just as before, I will search for Christmas. I have a number of Christmassy fonts here, so let's find one that is readable and that looks good. Marianda looks nice to me. It seems readable, so let's use this. I will open it here, get font, and get embed code. I will copy the link from my HTML here. I'll go back into my editor. I will paste it into index.html. Let me format this a little bit. And now I can actually use this in my CSS. And I'm just going to copy the code right from here, font family, Marianda cursive. All right, let's go into index and let's replace our font family with Marianda, and alternative, if Marianda is not available for some reason, then we're gonna default to cursive. Now, if we had a little bit more text in this UI, we would probably need another font that is not going to be cursive, that's going to be a little bit easier to read. Something like sans serif could work well for the body text along with this cursive for headlines. But as we're not dealing with a lot of text here, we're just gonna stick to this one selection, Merienda, in this example. It's certainly much better than Comic Sans or Times New Roman. I already mentioned that we have H2 and H4 elements here, and this is, again, an accessibility problem. We want to have headlines that follow a pattern H1, H2, H3, H4. So let's jump into HTML and let's tweak this. JavaScriptmas is our main headline, so this is going to be H1. By the way, Scrimba editor works really well with multiple cursors, so you can use them exactly as in Visual Studio Code. If you select a part of text and hit Command D, and you can very easily handle strings this way. Just as well, I can hit Command Shift L. This is going to select all occurrences of the selected text. Let me just remove this preview so you can see it. Command Shift L. There we go. All my H4 elements are selected, and I'm going to tweak them and change them to H2. And I will actually add classes to this. This is going to be title, and this is going to be subtitle. If you're working with classes instead of text in CSS, it will be very easy for you to tweak HTML if necessary and apply the styling for the title to a different element. All right, let's go into CSS and let's change this to title, and let's change this to subtitle. Let me expand the preview and pin it again. Another principle of a good UI is alignment. Generally speaking, you want things to be aligned. So my headline and subheadline are aligned here, but they're not aligned with my calendar. So if I set margins on my title, subtitle, and calendar element to be the same, this is going to look much better. I will remove the margin from my title here, and I will remove the margin from my calendar container. I also have maximum width set to 800 pixels, which means that on larger screen sizes, this is not going to take entirety of the space. This is usually not a bad idea because if somebody has a very large browser window, you probably don't want your UI to stretch all the way from one end to another end because it might be less usable. So it's a good idea to restrict it to something reasonable, but of course keep in mind that you want to use as much of the available space as you reasonably can. So let's remove this for now, and let's remove the padding. And if we remove it, you're going to see that we have more padding because this is actually ordered list element. You can see it right here in HTML with the class calendar container, which means that we actually want to reset this padding to something like 0. As you're already adding numbers with JavaScript, we can set list style to none and remove those additional numbers. So list style is going to be none. Things are now aligned nicely, but we still have a problem. And the problem is that there is not enough space between the edges of our screen and the actual content. To improve this, we should add a white space between our elements. And this is another UI design principle. You want to use white space to create hierarchy on your page. So if certain elements are related together, the white space between them is going to be smaller. If they're not directly related, you're going to want to have more white space between those elements. Generally speaking, you want to have quite a bit of white space between the edges of the browser and your actual content because it's going to be a lot easier to process, to read the content that way. So that is what we will do here. We will add padding to our body element just to have a little bit more breathing room between the edges of the browser and our actual content. Padding, let's try 2 RAM units. Maybe we could even go to 3 RAM units. Now it seems that we have much more space above our title as opposed to beside. That is because the headline by default will have top margin applied. So we'll just reset this here, set margin block to 0. Margin block is actually a logical equivalent of margin top and margin bottom. You should be using logical CSS properties instead of the physical ones like top, bottom, left, and right. Instead of that, you should be using inline and block properties. And if you want to learn more about that, check out my guide on using logical CSS properties where I explain exactly how and why you should use them. In any case, let's set this to 0. And now this is much more aligned, but we still have hierarchy problems because the size of our title and subtitle seems to be the same. And we don't want this. We actually want a title to be much bigger than our subtitle. And additionally, we also want to have more white space between our subtitle and our calendar. So let's set the font size of our title to something like 3 RAM. And let's set our subtitle, for example, to 1.5. When you're tweaking the font sizes, you want to make sure that the line height is appropriate. Right here, you can see that line height is a little bit too small for this to be readable. So I will increase that and set line height to something like 1.5. This seems sort of okay, but I think that we went a little bit too far. We want to reduce the size of our title and subtitle a bit. Maybe we should try 2 rem units for the title and 1 rem unit for the subtitle. All right, this is much better, but I still think that we can adjust whitespace right here on the top and reduce it a little bit. So I will set padding block to be 2 rem units and padding inline to be 3 rem units. Usually I want top and bottom padding to be a little bit smaller than my left and right padding. So that is what we're going to do here. Padding inline is going to be 3 rem units as it was, and padding block is going to be 2 rem units. There we go. And we still want to adjust the white space of our subtitle. We want to reduce it a little bit here between our title and increase it between the subtitle and the calendar. So margin block here is going to be 0 at the top and 2 rem units at the bottom. 0 is a little bit too small, so let's try 0.5. 0.5 does work better here. Usually when you're dealing with spacing, you want to have consistent spacing. So as we're using 2 rem units between the edge of our browser and our title here, it also makes sense to use 2 rem units here. Using the same space between different elements usually makes your UI much more refined and much more pleasant. So whenever you're working with paddings or margins, keep in mind that if you use certain padding for one element, try to apply the same padding to a different element as well. All right, our UI is really shaping up here. Let's work on the calendar UI next. I want this to be much more interesting and much more inviting than it currently is. I don't want this to look like a typical calendar. I want this to be much more interesting and much more clickable. First, let's adjust the sizes. On my calendar container and on calendar items, calendar boxes, sizings are in pixels. Padding is here 2 pixels, font size is 8 pixels. We have a gap of 2 pixels, and I will adjust this and make it much more aligned with our current design. So gap should be something like 1 rem unit. I don't need border radius here because I will not have a background on my calendar container. I want every item to appear as a separate entity. Let's remove this. Here on the calendar box, I will bump up my font size to something like 3 or 3.5 rem units. Now those icons are really popping out and it really looks like we have a present inside, exactly what we want. We will adjust this further, but let's adjust the padding now and let's try 1 rem unit. This could work okay. I'm going to remove text align here. I will click the border, and instead of dashed, I will add solid. And I'm going to use one of the colors we have in our color palette. I want this border to appear like it's glowing, so I'm going to use a white that is brighter than the current one that we have on our items. And that is going to be anti-flash white. Let me adjust this so you can see it. And this is not solid, but solid. There we go. And we're going to add a nice border radius here of 0.5 rem units. And this is already looking much more interesting, and I would much rather click on one of those items right now than before. I still want to adjust the design of this and make it much more interesting. Our icon is bigger because we set the font size on the calendar box to 3.5 rem units, but we're actually resetting the fonts on our paragraphs, which are this text and this, to 12 pixels. Another problem that I see here is that those items should be clickable, which means that we need a button inside. I don't want this to be paragraph. I actually want this to be button because I want this to be clickable. Well, actually, I want the entire box to be clickable, but we'll get to that a little bit later. We do want to have an interactive element in each one of our cards, in each one of our days, that users will be able to pick and open. As this is generated by JavaScript, I will jump into my JavaScript index.js file. So we have our calendar box here, and we have icons right here. These are actually classes from Font Awesome, and you can verify this if you go into index.html. And right here on top, you'll see that we're using Font Awesome CDN with the version 6.0.0. All right. So this is set up as description and as a p tag, but actually I want this to be a button. So let's change it. And just so we're not confused by this, I will select all my description variables and tweak them to button. I'll save this and let's see our preview. We do have a button here, but it doesn't look good. We will of course adjust this. Before we do, let's add classes to our elements. So our Font Awesome already has a class, but we also want to add a class to our number, this paragraph element. So let's do that. Number.ClassList.add. The class here will be calendar minus number. And our button is also going to have a class. We're going to use button.ClassList.add, and we'll set the class simply to button. So now we can use those classes in our CSS. I will remove this selector here, and I will add Font Awesome selector, and I will move my font size 3.5 rem units right here. Let me pin the preview again. So now our icon is nice and big. We also want to style calendar number, and we also want to style calendar button. which is going to be the button class. And here I'm going to remove the default browser styling. WebKit appearance is going to be none. And there you go. We're going to remove the border. My idea about this button is to make it appear like a ribbon. We'll have like open me ribbon right here at the top. We'll have a number of the card here somewhere at the bottom, and we will have icon on the side. And I will make the entire box clickable. So we don't want only this button to be clickable, even though we do want to have an interactive element in each component. We want entire box to be clickable. So if user clicks anywhere here, we want to open that particular day, that particular gift, that particular award. So this means that I will position my button and my icon absolutely. I want icon to be in the bottom right corner, and I want the button to be on top left right here. I will add position relative to my calendar box because I want the positioning on my button and number to be relative to that of a box. And then we can set up our font awesome icon, position absolute. Inset block end is going to be 0, and inset inline end is also going to be 0. Inset block end is equivalent to bottom, and inset inline end is equivalent to right. These are logical equivalents. And the button is also going to have position absolute. This time we're going to have inset block start set to something like 0.5 frame units, and inset inline start is going to be 0. Now this is positioned appropriately, but it's still not looking nearly as we want. I want the number to be bigger and to be positioned at the bottom left. So let's set this up. Font size, let's try 2 rem units. All right. And to align it, I can simply use align content property on my parent element. The button and icon are absolutely positioned, so they will not be affected by alignment, but this number will be affected exactly as I want. So on my calendar box, I will set align content to end. And nothing is happening because we have margin on my calendar number element. So I will remove this. Margin here is going to be 0, but we will set minimum block height on our calendar box. So I want those to be a little bit taller. So block size is going to be something like 5 rem units. Now they're nice and tall, and my number is positioned exactly what I want using the align content and positioning. Align content is usually used with Flexbox and Grid, but it now works with block level elements or with display block. So if you ever want to center something vertically, you don't have to resort to any hacks. You don't have to use Flexbox or Grid. You can just set align content with start, end, or center to your block level element, and its content will be aligned exactly as you want. Now the spacing between our number and icon is off, so we actually want to move this icon a little bit further, and to make it even more interesting, we're going to rotate it. So on our font awesome selector, I will tweak inset block end to minus 0.5 frame units, and inset inline end also to minus 0.5 frame units. That way we actually pin this icon to the bottom right, and this makes this design a little bit more interesting. Of course, we're going to rotate it as well. I will use individual transform property, rotate, set it to negative 25 degrees. This is quite interesting now, but I actually want my boxes here to be wider, so I will tweak the sizing of my grid, or rather, I will tweak the setup on my grid, and instead of 5 items, let's try using 4 items. This works much better, and now I have more space to actually tweak the button here because I want to align text on my button with the number here. So I'll add padding to my button. Padding inline is going to be 1 rem unit, and a padding block is going to be half of that. The padding looks okay now, but the colors are still off and the font as well. So let's first tweak the font. I want to have exactly the same font as here. As you remember, on the body element, we have Miranda font set up, but buttons don't inherit fonts by default. So we'll set this up here. Font family, inherit. All right. Now this is looking much better, but we want the background of this ribbon to actually be green, and the color should be dark green. So color we can just inherit. So now we already have the green that we're using here on the icon and the number, and the background color is going to be set up from one of the colors in our color palette. I don't see it entirely here, but this is what I want, ash gray. All right, this is better, but it's still not a ribbon. I want to cut out an arrow from here, and to do that, I will use clip path property. So on my button, I will set the clip path with the polygon function, and I will set my points here. First point is going to be 0, 0 right here. The second point is going to be 100% and 0, which is right here. So let me add a new line here so we can see it better. Next point is going to be at the middle and a little bit tucked in. So x coordinate is going to be 100% minus 1 rem unit. We're going to use calc function for that, 100% minus 1 rem unit. And the second one is going to be 50%. This is exactly where I want this to be vertically, but we will probably tweak this value later. The next point is going to be 100%, 100% right here. And the last one is going to be 0, 100%. There we go. I'm going to again move this to new line so you can see it better. 1 rem unit here is a little bit too much, so I'll switch this to 0.5, right? And I will increase the padding by this amount on the ribbon because I want the padding to be equal here and here. So padding inline is going to be 1 rem unit and 1.5 on the end. And now this is still a little bit too high here. I want this spacing here to be pretty much equal to spacing here. So instead block start here is going to be something like 1 rem unit. And this is looking much better than the initial version, but it's still kind of flat. We have just green colors here in this UI, and this makes it kind of boring, and it's maybe even not that Christmassy. So I want to introduce a little bit of red. We do have a red in our color palette, so let's use it. And for that, let's just switch every second item, every second card from green colors to red. To do that, we'll use end child selector, and I'm just going to nest right here in the calendar box selector and child to n. I will set background and color here to red. I will set color here to carmine from my font palette. All right, and now you actually see that our icon is going across the boundaries of this item. So we don't want this. Therefore, we're going to set overflow to clip here. We want to cut this out. And now this is much better. And of course, we want to tweak the ribbon here and change it to light red. I'll copy my end child selector, target the button here, and I will set the background color to light coral. And my color is already inheriting this color from here because we have set up the button with color inherit. This is pretty much broken, which means that we actually want to restrict the size of our items, which means that we will tweak our grid and change one fraction unit to min-max function, where we want this to be at least 8 rem units for this to look okay. All right, we're going to need to adjust the responsive version, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Now, those colors on the ribbons are still not accessible. I think there's not enough contrast between this light green and this dark green, and between this light red and dark red. So let's tweak the colors. We will increase the lightness of light coral to 79, and we will increase the lightness of ash gray to 80. So now this should be a bit more accessible. Now this is looking much more interesting and much more Christmassy, but what if we make it even more interesting by changing the sizes of some of these items? For example, let's make every 4th item span 2 columns and every 10th item perhaps 2 columns and 2 rows. Now this is going to change the visual hierarchy, and the bigger items are going to seem more prominent, like there's bigger price inside, which might not be what we want, but this will certainly make the UI much more interesting and much more refined. So let's try it out. On our calendar box, I will add end child selector, and I will target every 5th item, 5n. Grid column is going to be span 2. All right, so now every 5th item is bigger. Now this seems nice, but we also need to tweak icon here. There's much more space for it now, so we can make it a lot bigger. We're going to target here font awesome icon, and font size 6 rem units seems quite nice. And now that I think of it, I actually can nest this button here as well. I don't need to repeat my end child to end selector, and I am missing a semicolon here. So I will add it, and I will nest this right within this selector. All right, this is very nice. And now just as well, maybe every 10th item, or maybe just a few specific items can be even bigger. So let's try end child, maybe just specifically set end child 10, grid column span 2, and grid row span 2. So this item should be expanded, but it's not. I guess we are setting the fixed height for this item. This is not what we want, so we will tweak it. And indeed, block size here is set to 5 rem units, but I actually want it to be at minimum 5 rem units. There we go. So now this item is much bigger, but we still have 2 spaces, so maybe we can increase the size of one of the other items. Perhaps 20 is going to work quite nice. And of course, on those items, again, we want to increase the icon size. There's plenty of space here, so let's use it. I'm going to select font awesome icon. So font size is going to be 13 rem units, and I'm also going to tweak inset inline end and inside block end. I'm going to move it a little bit more on the side, minus 2 rem units, and inside block end, is going to be -2 RAM units. And there we go. This is looking much better now. We can make it even more interesting if we tweak the icons here. Now we're dealing with Font Awesome. We've already seen that. And Font Awesome has a number of icons. So let's make use of those and let's change the GIFs here to some different icons that are Christmas themed, just so we have a little bit more variety here. I will actually open Font Awesome site. I will search for an icon. I'm going to switch to free because we are using a free version and the version is 6 exactly. So now I'm going to search for Christmas. And here are some of the icons that we can use. So sleigh, holy berry, gifts, candy cane. These all seem nice for our use case. We can do this if we add it to our JavaScript. Let's unpin this. And here where we add an icon, we can tweak this and add this to a variable. So by default, our variable is going to be gift. And the name of the variable is going to be icon ID. Let icon ID. By default, it's gift, but we will tweak it. And for every second item, if I module 2 is 0, then icon ID is going to be candy cane. Let's copy this. Every 7th icon can be holy berry. And perhaps every 10th icon can be gifts. All right, let's save it. Let's see the preview. And indeed, we have different icons here. Now, the thing with this is that it's not really working well as a responsive design. If we stretch this, it can be way too wide, and on the mobile sizes, it's just gonna go off the screen. So let's fix this. I'll jump back into CSS and I will pin my preview. This is great for this version, but if we expand this, we probably want to restrict the UI to something a little bit more reasonable. And we should set our calendar container max inline size to something like 50 RAM units. This is much better, but we also want to center it now. So we'll set margin inline to autumn. And now, of course, our headline is not aligned with this. We also want to restrict our headline to our maximum inline size. As I don't want to repeat this, I will just immediately add this value to the variable. And let's call the variable max inline size. I'll add it here. Max inline size is going to be 50 RAM units. I will want to repeat this variable for my title and subtitle as well. Additionally, I could also wrap this into a header component in HTML and then just work with the header, which seems like a better idea because we are talking about the header of our page here. So let's do that. I'm going to wrap h1 and h2 into a header element, and I will just use the class header here. There we go. And now in my CSS, I can add a header selector here, and I will set max inline size to variable max inline size. Also, margin inline should be auto. There we go. So now this is really nicely centered. What about the smaller sizes? Now here we could switch from 4 columns to 3 columns, and then for even smaller sizes to 2 columns, but let's just immediately switch to 1 column for this mobile size and call it a day, because it's going to take way too much time to set this up properly. But if you're going to be working on your projects, then you want to make sure that all screen sizes are using as much real estate as it's reasonably possible. Let's set up media query. We're going to use max width here. Let's try 80 RAM units, and let's just set body background to red, just so we can see at what point is this actually applied. Let's try 45. Now at this point, we're going to switch to single layout. I will copy my grid template columns value and calendar container selector. I'll paste it here. I don't need display grid, but I do need grid template columns. I'm going to tweak this, and instead of repeating 4 columns, I'm just going to have 1 column. So I don't need to repeat anything. I will just straight up have 1 fraction unit as my column value. We are changing some items to span multiple columns, so we do want to change that. So I'm just going to use direct child selector with end child. I'm using end child here only because I want to increase the specificity of this selector. Otherwise, end child is going to take precedence over the class I use here. So grid column here is just going to be 1. Of course, we do want to tweak the sizing of our icons here. They're a little bit too small, so I'm going to also target Font Awesome and set font size to 5 frame units. And of course, we're going to have to override selectors here. And let me just remove this red background. I don't know why didn't I remove it sooner. So this should be okay, but we do want to force 5 frame units for all our icons. So to work around that, I'm just going to move this right here underneath my end child selector just to increase the specificity. So now everything is okay except for positioning. of those items, because if you remember on our large icons, we've also tweaked inside inline end and inside block end. So I will also reset this and change it to minus 0.5. There we go. This is much better. Let's add interactivity now. So when I hover over those items, I want this icon to pop out, maybe make the background a little bit brighter, just so we have some action going on and to make it even more inviting to click. First, I'm going to set my cursor to pointer on calendar box element, because I want to make it clear that the entire box is clickable. Currently only the button is clickable, but we will tweak that a little bit later. So cursor is going to be pointer. This seems okay. And now on hover, I'll just nest the selector right here. I want to set the background color to anti-flash white. So when I hover it, you see that it does light up, but I want to have a transition here. So let's add transition property. Let's have this transition be 0.2 seconds long. We're going to use ease in out transition function, and we will target all properties. I need seconds here. All right. Now those are lighting up, and I also want my icon to increase in size once I hover this. So I'll target here my icon selector, font awesome, and I'll tweak font size here. Let's try 5 units. This might be a little bit too much. Let's try 4.3. A lot of times when you're working with UI like this, you're going to have to try out different values, see what works, what doesn't work. And you're going to find exactly the sweet spot that you're looking for. Of course, we do want to animate this, so we will set up transition. I'll just copy this rule here, and I'll paste it on my font awesome selector. We will transition all properties, so let's see it. All right. Our icon is increased in size. Our color lights up. We also want to extend this ribbon a little bit, perhaps add additional padding here, and maybe do something with the number. For the number, I'm thinking we could reduce its size just so we have this thematic balanced effect. Calendar number will also have the transition that I copied earlier, and we're going to reduce the size to 1.5 rem units. I'm going to find my selector, hover here. I'm going to target calendar number, and I will set font size to 1.5 rem units. Let's try it out. Or maybe we can just decrease the size of our ribbon as well. I'll add a button selector here. I'll set font size to something like 1 rem unit, which is exactly what we have. I've forgotten about that. Let's try 0.8. Of course, we need to transition that as well. So I'll add transition property to my button element. Let's format this properly. I just added multiple lines here so you can see it better, because our preview was getting in the way. There we go. I'll pin it again. Now this effect is really shaping up, but we can do even more. For example, we can rotate additionally this icon. On our default selector, we had rotate set to minus 25 degrees. Maybe we can do something like 20 or 15. Let's try it out and see what works better. Let's try 20. Okay, what about 15? Even nicer. I really like this, so we need to adjust our bigger items now. So let's use our nchild 5n selector. And I'm going to copy my font awesome here. Let's try 8 rem units. Maybe 7. This is nice. And of course, we do want to target our 10th and 20th selector. And I do realize now that I just could have used 10n here, and it would work. And now on my hover selector, I want to switch this to 10n and maybe do something like 15 rem units. Let's try it out. That's probably too much. 14. Maybe the font is a little bit too big. So let's tweak the default 10n selector and change the font size from 13 to 12. Now we have a nicer, better, bigger transition. Those 10 and 20 items really look like they are much more prominent than other items, but we'll just leave it at that. And the last bit that I want to do here is, whenever I hover one of the items, I want it to pop out entirely. So I'll just set zoom to something more than 100% on my hover. And now we're going to have individual transform property scale, and we'll set it to 1.2. Let's try it out. It's probably too much, 1.1. It doesn't really work well with bigger items. It just goes way too far. So perhaps we want to increase the gap between our items, maybe to 1.5 rem units. Okay. Yeah, this seems okay. The last thing is, as I mentioned, we want this entire box to be interactive. Right now, we only have this button part clickable. And just as well, if I try to use my keyboard navigation by hitting tab here, I don't see anything highlighted. Ideally, I want to have clear focus outlines on every one of our items. And right here on our calendar box, I will add another selector here at the bottom. And that selector is going to be focus within. So whenever an element within this container has a focus, I want to do something to this container. And specifically, I want to add an outline here. Outline here is going to be 5 pixels solid, and I'm going to use my white color, anti-flash white. Of course, I'm missing an and character here. Let's try it out. And now as I'm tabbing through, this is visible, but not ideal. So I will adjust the outline position. Outline offset is going to be 0.5. Let's tweak the outline to 0.2 ms actually. All right. And now here it's going to be maybe 0.4. As I'm tabbing through, the outline is shown. I am selecting the boxes that I want, the days that I want, but I actually also want to apply styling from my hover selector to focus selector as well. So let's add focus within pseudo class here as well. All right, now let's try it out. Now, as I'm tabbing through, those are also increased with a nice effect, and it's pretty clear which item is visible. So I need to add interactivity here now. When I click a certain item, I want to open a pop-up window, a model window perhaps, and display a certain gift. This is actually a part of the stretch goals, make the calendar more interactive. I find this challenge really interesting and exciting, and I will do all the stretch goals, but not in this video. I'll do a follow-up video and I will show you exactly how to add interactivity, how to create pop-ups that show gifts, and how to save that into the local storage. I think it's going to be pretty cool. So if you're not subscribed to this channel, smash that subscribe so you don't miss the second part of this video. And until then, make sure you participate in JavaScriptmas as well. Hit the link in the description, solve this challenge or any other challenge. Of course, once you solve the challenge, make sure to submit your solution. That way you have a chance of winning a MacBook and Scrimba Pro subscription, along with some merchandise from MDN and Scrimba. Share your solution on social media as well, and please share your solution with me here on YouTube. Just add it to the comments below. I will make sure to approve all of your comments with links because YouTube might initially put those on hold. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks so much to Scrimba for sponsoring. My name is Zoran Yambor. I will see and hear you in a different JavaScriptness challenge, or rather, in the next video.